Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Saltworks podcast. We are so excited you're here with us today. We've got a phenomenal episode. Terry Slawson, you might know him. This was my first time meeting him. I'd heard great things, and they all were so true. I can't wait to share his story with you today. We talk about God's faithfulness, the importance of seeking Him in everything, prayer, community, steadfastness. I can't wait for you to hear it. But first, I want to tell you about a few partners that we have. Parents, have you heard of the newest children's book? Join Kip, a brave little box turtle, as he learns to overcome his fears through the power of prayer and trusting in God. When faced with unexpected challenges, Kip discovers that he's never alone. Centered around the verse, Psalm 56:3, when I'm afraid, I will trust in you. This book teaches children the importance of faith and the strength that comes from praying when they feel scared. Perfect for bedtime stories or family reading time, Kip, the brave little turtle, inspires young hearts to be brave just like Kip. This book is best for any boy or girl between the ages of 4 and 8 years old, and it can be purchased from Amazon or the author's site at www.upfromthemuck.com. Local author and podcast host Brandy Bostic also exclusively sells the Kip plush doll, which makes a fun and cuddly addition to the book. The plush doll, along with all the other merchandise, can be found on her website, again, upfromthemuck.com. Make sure you check it out. Okay, we know how busy the fall can be. We're running the roads with sports, school activities, work, travel, fall parties, and festivities. There isn't always time for meal plan and prep. That's why Daily Press has fast and friendly service for your busy schedule with their made-to-order deli options for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And for your absolute busiest days, the fresh grab-and-go options in their open-air cooler and hot-to-go box. What you may not know is that they even have a wide variety of frozen take-home meals and appetizers for maybe a crazy day for dinner, or maybe you don't want to cook for that party you're going to. We've all been there. And we can't forget all the baked good options and fresh brewed coffee. Daily Press has 4 locations, making it convenient for you and your family, and are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at all but one location. Plus, it's a family-owned business, so stop by Daily Press today. No one wants to have to think about making medical decisions until we have to. But in those moments, it can be so hard to know what we need to do next. That's why Northeast Imaging is a patient-friendly diagnostic testing facility that is doctor trusted and patient preferred. They offer MRI, CT, X-ray, and ultrasound. Their friendly staff provides high-quality scans focusing on the delivery of exemplary care to the patient and their referring providers. And listen, it doesn't matter if you're using your health insurance or you're paying cash. Northeast Imaging is almost always more affordable than local hospitals. The facility is conveniently located at 1703 Lammy Lane here in Monroe. They are open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., so take that decision off your list and tell your healthcare provider you want to go to Northeast Imaging. And now I'm so excited to share with you my conversation with Terry Slawson. Terry, welcome to the Saltworks podcast. We're honored for you to be here and share with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. This is our first time meeting, but first of all, Lindsay has been adamant we need to get you on. But then Colin, Stephen, Kirsty was on a few weeks ago, and he was like, oh my goodness, yes, you have to get him. And then this morning, Andrew was like, oh, you look nice. I was like, well, I'm recording. So I tried today. And he was like, oh, who are you recording with? And I told him, he was like, oh, that is going to be so good. So I'm really excited to hear your story and to have you today.
Well, I always count it a privilege just to tell what God has done and what He's doing, and I'm thankful to have been a part and be a part of all of those guys' lives. And
yeah.
So anyway, very thankful.
Well, I know they are grateful as well. For those of you who don't know you, or maybe don't know everything about you, who is Terry Slawson?
Terry Slawson is just a guy that loves Jesus, and that God has just blessed me and walked with me through this life. But had the privilege of serving as student minister at a local church, First Baptist Monroe, for a number of years, and then God led us to begin a work called Seeker Springs out south of West Monroe.
Yeah.
And I've got 3 kids. They're all married now.
Yeah.
And have 9 grandkids now. So
wow.
In a new chapter of life that's really good.
Yeah.
So we really
9 grandkids and counting.
9 grandkids and counting, for sure. We're expecting 10 just the announcement at any time. So yeah,
That's awesome.
that's good.
Man, that's amazing, and I know that's a big part of your story that we'll get to,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah,
we're honored to hear that. Now, you grew up in Monroe, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I was born in Mississippi, but
Okay.
when I was very young, we moved to Arkansas, and then um, at the end of my first grade year, we moved to Louisiana, and I've been in Louisiana, except
Mhm.
for a brief period when I went to seminary in Fort Worth. I've been in Louisiana
Oh,
all the rest of my life. So
yeah.
yeah, I grew up not far from here in the North Monroe area. I went to Jack Hayes,
Yeah,
then went to Ouachita, and
that's
went
awesome.
to Tech for a few years, and then I transferred to ULM. Some said I saw the light, some said I ran from the light. So anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's some opinions. Now, what was your family life like growing up? Y'all attended church, kind of back and forth?
We had a great mom and dad
Mhm.
that loved us well, but church just wasn't. We went to church some, but it wasn't a regular thing that took
Yeah.
place in our lives. But we moved quite a bit when I was young, and one of those moves landed us in the neighborhood across the street from North Monroe
Yeah,
Baptist Church. So
that's awesome.
lived in several areas out here in the North Monroe
Mhm.
area.
Yeah. Um, what what changed or shifted for you personally from church being an occasional thing, not necessarily a priority, to actually becoming a follower of Christ? What was that moment or time like?
When when we lived in the neighborhood across the street from North Monroe Baptist, we lived close enough where um, we could actually walk to church,
Mhm.
and mom and dad would allow my sister and I to walk over,
Yeah.
and I had some buddies that some friends from school that I knew were a part of the church there, so I wanted to go, and so began to go over there, and again, our family, we would go as a family from time to time, but
Mhm.
on a Sunday night when I was 12 years old, um, it was not a it wasn't a revival or anything out of the ordinary. It was just an ordinary Sunday night. I just remember Brother Ralph Jones was our pastor, and I remember just the being overwhelmed with what Jesus had done for me, and I guess the realization of my need for Him.
Yeah.
And I was just, I remember that night going home, going in my bedroom by myself, and just crying out to God in the best way that I knew how.
Yeah.
And that night, I surrendered my life. I
Mhm.
talked to mom and dad, and they took me to Brother Jones, Brother Ralph, and
Yeah.
he sat down and kind of walked with me through
Yeah.
um, the process. I was baptized, and but that's when the shift took place in
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
Lots of ups and downs after that,
Right.
but that's when the shift took place.
How did that look for you walking that out after? Did you have church community? Did you get more plugged in? What did that look for
Yeah,
you?
those two guys, a couple of guys, Philip Bryan and Mike Causey,
Mm.
we were the same age and went to school together, and but they were a part of that church, and I don't know. I saw their lives, and I saw the lives of their families, and I just desired that and wanted that. And so I through those guys, I think helped walk with me in my really still walk with me today.
Yeah.
But they were there for me, and it was a draw for me. I wanted to be there, and
Mhm.
so I just got involved. I just um, became involved in the youth group and youth camps and mission trips, and there was a mission trip particularly when I was a senior in high school that not sure I'd be where I'm at today. It was a spiritual marker in my life
Wow.
that God used. So
Can you tell us about that mission trip
I
and
can.
what it was that impacted you?
Yeah, I was a senior. I love baseball, football. Um, were my two sports, but it was baseball as my last year of All Stars, and I had made All Stars every year, and this was going to be my last year. And we had won the district tournament, and we were going to be going to state the same week as this mission trip.
Mm.
I remember Miss Marilyn Hannywinkle. I don't know if um, but she was working with the youth at that time and some others, but we had planned to go on a mission trip to South Texas, a little town called Alvin, Texas. Uh, Nolan Ryan is from there, if y'all know who Nolan Ryan is. But anyway, Alvin, Texas, and we were going to be doing some backyard Bible club kind of stuff and some youth revivals at night. And I remember there was a little boy. His name was Lorenzo, that God just used me to connect with. And I'm not sure who meant more to the other, because Lorenzo, God sure used him to help me to realize that God wanted to use me to help others know the truth of who he is. And like I said, it was my last year of All Stars, and we had won district, and that fell on the week that we were to go to the state tournament. And I remember going to my coach and telling him my dilemma, and he just pretty much put it in my court. Said, "Terry, you got to do what you got to do." And
Wow.
And I ended up going on that trip, and I'm so thankful I did.
Yeah.
Because of that, what God did in my life through that little boy Lorenzo, and the other work that we were doing there that week. I remember we were holding a youth revival at night. I remember after one night, I went out in the yard of that church by myself, and just I think that was another surrender moment in my life where I wanted to do whatever it was he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And they ended up winning state while I was gone, and I came back.
Yeah.
And coach allowed me to come back in, and I remember we went to the World Series in Laurel, Mississippi.
Yeah.
This is back in 1981, and I guess it'd be 1981, and we got beat pretty early on, but it was double elimination, and we ended up making it to the finals. We had to beat, I believe it was Florida. We had to beat them twice, and we ended up winning the World Series.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that if you follow God, you're going to win all your World Series. That's not what it is. But for me,
that was
he used it in my life to say, "Terry, if you put me first, I'll take care of the rest."
Yeah.
And it's true.
That's amazing that you had a coach that would say, "Hey, you make this decision," because there are some, but there aren't a lot, that would. It's just so easy to think whatever we have, it's not just coaches, whatever we have going on, that's the most important thing, and
BJ Thomas was his name. His son, Mitch Thomas, is athletic director out at West Washita.
Yeah. Okay.
It's his dad. His dad, BJ Thomas, was the one that was our coach that year.
Yeah.
He's a great man.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love also that you mentioned it was almost like another surrender, because, so often our first surrender is realizing we need a savior, and we want to follow him, and we want to have this purpose and be a follower of Christ. But there's so many more surrenders of, okay, not my will, but yours, and I want to live for you, not just from the salvation, but for your mission, and that's just so, I love the way you laid that out in your story.
Well, it's really true, even daily.
Yeah.
We daily surrender to him, because there's things that want to pull us away from who he is and what he's about, and it's a daily refocusing and surrendering to him. Yeah, but that was a big one.
Yeah. Did you know in that time, like that surrender that you mentioned, I think in the churchyard or however you said, did you know at that point, was it just like, okay, I want to do what you have for me? Did you know that was going to look like some form of ministry at that point?
I really didn't. I didn't know. I really didn't. I went on to college. Like I said, I went to Tech for 3 years and studied business. And transferred. Laid out a quarter, came home and worked, and met this pretty young lady, and ended up transferring purely for academic reasons. No, it was a lot about her, but I transferred to NLU at the time, and still studied business. So I really felt like, I think I was wrestling with a call into ministry even through college.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I had had justified it by saying, well, God can use me in the secular world as well as he, and it was true. And that is true.
Right.
But it was, God was leading me to ministry, but I was justifying not doing.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was another surrender point that took
Yeah.
place. But so I didn't at that time really know
Yeah.
when I surrendered, but God continued to
Yeah.
lead me in that direction.
Well, tell us about that dating relationship that was also happening at that time.
Yeah, I had um, mom and dad had gone through some struggles. They ended up divorcing while I was at Tech,
Yeah.
and my sister was back home in the midst of that. And I was really worried about her, but
Mhm.
so school. I remember one quarter particularly was just it was horrible. It was a terrible quarter, and my grades were bad. I ended up laying out a quarter. I always say I laid out a quarter, but really Tech laid me out a quarter, and I came home and worked. And but during that time at North Monroe Baptist Church, I
Mhm.
came back home, went to church on a Wednesday night. Well, there was this there was this girl there that I had never seen before, and so I remember where she was sitting in the old sanctuary
Mhm.
at North Monroe. I forget what it's called now. I don't know what y'all.
Would it be the West? Is that considered new? Had
It's
like the
not the
green
gym. It's
pews.
it's across the street, the oldest building where the offices are, and it's back
So it's I don't know if some people still call it the chapel,
the chapel.
but
Yeah.
now it's kids' church.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I got you. Well, in that chapel,
Yeah.
that's where I was baptized. That's where I surrendered to ministry.
Yeah.
That room but that's where I saw Tammie for the first time. And so anyway,
That's where Andrew and I got engaged.
is it
Yeah.
really in that room?
Uh-huh.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, that's where I first laid eyes on Tammie, and anyway, ended up transferring from Tech to NLU and graduated. And she and I dated. The night I graduated from NLU, I proposed to Tammie.
Wow.
And 3.5 months later, we married. We'd been dating about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I apologized to Tammie's mom, Miss Merle, because that was a short engagement. But we married in
Sometimes
19.
that's the way to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we married in 1986.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
August of 1986 in that chapel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, at what point, because you mentioned you were still in college trying to go like, okay, well, he could use me in the secular world, which is actually absolutely true
Mhm.
and needed. But you look back and feel like, okay, but he was actually moving me
Mhm.
in this direction, and I was kind of resisting it. Was that a gradual decision for you? Like, well, let me volunteer over here, let me do this, or was it like, okay, no, I feel this call, and I need to walk in that?
Yeah, it was a gradual. Tammy and I both worked with the youth
Hmm.
while we were in college, while we were dating. We worked with the youth at North Monroe.
Yeah.
Um, so we both served in youth. We
Mhm.
we definitely had that heart and desire to work with youth, with students. But I graduated with a degree in business. I went to work for the Sherwin-Williams Company. Went through their manager trainee program and worked for them for almost 2 years. But during that time period, it was a gradual process of really finally surrendering to
Yeah.
the fact that I can use you and I will use you in the
Right.
secular world, but I want you to do this.
Yeah.
And so I surrendered. Remember in August of let's see, that would have been August of 87.
Okay.
Surrendered to ministry
Yeah.
and made it known in church August 4th of 87.
Mm.
And then Tammy and I moved to Fort Worth, Texas,
Mhm.
seminary at Southwestern in Fort
Yeah.
Worth. And so we moved over there. Uh, Tammy worked. I went to school and served at a small church south of Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And really didn't expect to come back to Louisiana, but graduated 2.5 years later and ended up coming back to First Baptist Church Monroe.
Yeah.
So I'd never been to that church, but
Okay. Yeah. And you were youth minister there
at First Monroe.
at First Monroe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Came as their student minister
Awesome.
in May of 1990.
Yeah. Do you feel like y'all's heart for youth way back then was because of the road that you'd walked as a kid and as like, being able to walk to the church and having that
I do.
experience? Yeah.
Yes, I think all of those things factored in that.
Yeah.
Um, those two buddies that walked with me when I
Mhm.
was in middle school and high school, I think they had a part in it. I
Yeah.
think the people that I think my mom and dad had a part in it.
Yeah.
They um,
And they took it seriously to take you to Ralph Jones,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, and mom and dad were always supportive. They were continued. My dad has passed away. My mom is still alive, but my parents, my sister Tony and I, we've had great parents that have always supported us and walked with us.
Mhm.
And I remember even going to seminary out in Fort Worth. I remember my dad asking me all the dad questions like, where are you going to work? How are you going to pay the bills?
Yeah.
The questions that I needed to be asked.
Yeah.
As a son, I needed my dad to ask those questions, and he did. But I think my parents had a part in it. Yeah, I think Lorenzo down in South Texas,
Yeah.
that mission trip. Um, I think God used that in a great way as well. So,
Mm-hmm. I think we talk about this a lot. We talked about this especially in Stephen's episode that we can tend to just. I think sometimes in the church we can tend to think like, oh, well, we need to have some kids events, but it's like, no, like this is like what they're going through, what they're walking through is so important.
yes.
And sometimes we can gloss over that. I
Mhm.
think, even though in all of our stories, it was a big deal what we walked through as kids and as youth. And it's always so encouraging. I always need to hear people say, no, it's important,
Mm.
as a mom, and
Yes.
as just a part of the body of Christ. And so I love that.
Yes.
Um, Okay, so you're in Fort Worth for seminary. Um, did y'all have Brittany in Fort Worth?
Mhm.
Okay, both of your girls?
No, just
Okay.
Brittany. We had been out there about a year, and Brittany was born in May the 20th of '89. So we had been out there a little over a year,
Yeah. Hmm.
about a year and a half when we had Brittany.
Yeah.
So she was born in Texas. She was the only one born in Texas. Caitlin and Justin were both born over here at North Monroe Hospital back in
Yeah.
the day. So
I was too.
were you?
Yep. Sure was. So y'all move back, have another daughter.
Mm-hmm.
What's the age difference between your girls?
Brittany and Caitlin are 3.5 years apart. Brittany
Okay.
was born in '89. Caitlin was born in '92.
Yeah. That's that a 3-year-old can go get the wipes for
That's
you or
right.
whatever. We didn't have that. Ours are all really close together. But that's awesome. You mentioned in your notes somewhere in there you have your girls, you've moved back,
Mm-hmm.
a time of restlessness
Yes.
for you and Tammie. What did that look like for y'all? How did you navigate that, and where did that lead?
That restlessness came. We were talking about kids.
Yeah.
We had Brittany in Fort Worth. We moved back. We had Caitlin
Hmm.
North Monroe. We were praying. We had two girls. We were praying about having a third child.
Hmm.
And Tammie said, "You shouldn't have more kids than you got adults in the family." So she was very content with two kids.
As a mother of 3, that might be an accurate statement.
But we were going to use. There was a National Youth Ministers Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were going to use that time to pray about it.
Mhm.
Just instead of just having a child or not having a child, we just wanted to spend some time praying about it. So we used that that conference as a time to really make that a focus of prayer about having a third child.
Yeah.
Well, during that time, um, God planted this restlessness in our hearts that we knew it was up to something, but we couldn't put our finger on exactly what it was. We ended up having that third child. Justin, our son,
Mhm.
was born in let's see, he was born in 97. Uh, but that restlessness we wrestled with, that was in February of 1996.
Yeah.
And we came back from Atlanta. Um, just, I mean, things were going great in student ministry. We loved it where we were, and we continue to go. That's still where we go to church, that same church.
Yeah.
But this restlessness we wrestled with from February. We talked with other older people we trusted, just sharing with them what was on our hearts, the scripture that had come to mind,
Mm-hmm.
um, things that were happening, asking people to pray with us and for us, through that time. Well, in on Monday morning, September the 10th
Mm-hmm.
of 1996 is when God revealed what that restlessness was all about. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Cedar Springs.
Yeah.
It was on a Monday morning. We as staff would normally on Monday mornings go in the sanctuary and have some prayer time, and then we'd go back in the office and do logistical calendaring, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, this particular Monday morning, we were not going to meet because later in the week we were going to go out to a camp on Lake Darbonne and do some long range planning. But that time had been special to me because of that restlessness.
Mm-hmm.
So my intern was with me, and I asked him to come go with me, and we went down to the sanctuary. Our pastor saw us, and he joined us down there, and I just shared with him that restlessness and the scriptures that God had continued to bring up during that time, and we had been in there probably 30 or 45 minutes. And this elderly prayer warrior lady in our church, her name was Miss Anita Durbin. Um, she comes walking through the side doors of the sanctuary, and she said, "Oh, I didn't want to disturb y'all." And we said, "No, come on in." You always wanted to hear what she had to say.
Yeah.
She was one of those godly, uh, just she didn't just say she would pray; she would labor in prayer for you. She came in and she said, "Well, I wanted to ask y'all to pray about two things." She said, "First, there's a group of ladies meeting in my home for Bible study in her community, and she was asking us to pray for them as they met together." And then she said, "Second, I would like to ask you to pray about what God would have done with Okaloosa." And that was Cedar Springs was the old Okaloosa school.
Mm-hmm.
That was later the old Okaloosa Baptist camp. Um, and maybe at another time or another place, it wouldn't have meant anything, but
Yeah.
it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Wow.
And I don't think I said anything else the whole time we were in there. I was just, it just kind of overwhelmed me. And, um, but I knew something had happened.
Yeah.
And I remember going home and talking to Tammie, and um, we were going on, it was our 10-year anniversary, which was in August. But in student ministry, you don't get to do it during the summer. You have to wait till like September or October. So we were going in September that very next week. And I remember while we were on that trip, we were in uh, Hilton Head, South Carolina. Some friends from seminary had given us their parents' condo for the week. And we went out there and we went to church at First Baptist Hilton Head. And the preacher preached out of the story of Gideon out of Judges.
Mm.
And where Gideon, he threw out the fleece, but he said, "God, I'm willing, but I need to know that it's you talking."
Mm.
And that's where we were. We were willing to do whatever, but we needed to know it was of him and not of me or
Yeah.
not of Miss Anita. God, is
Yeah.
this of you or not? So,
I love the way you illustrate that because I think sometimes in the church we can use that story as like, God give me a sign. Like we don't want to do any of the prayerful work,
mm-hmm.
of seeking Him and listening and waiting. But y'all had a specific thing of like, hey, we feel this on our heart, but we want to make sure it's you,
Yes.
and that is such a good way of saying that. I love that.
Well, I know Terry, and I know I can do things out of
Yeah.
selfish desires or whatever, and I don't want to. I wanted to make sure it was of him,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. I want you to talk more about Cedar Springs and how that came to be. But I also want to ask you, I want to go back to what you were saying about, oh God, I'm on my notes here. I want to go back to what you were saying about that restlessness because I think sometimes we can have a hard time distinguishing discontentment from restlessness. Do you do you have any bit of wisdom for someone that doesn't know, am I feeling discontentment or am I feeling restlessness and what do I do with this?
Yeah. I think we've got to be careful not to run away from whatever trouble or struggle that we're going in.
Mhm.
There can be a restlessness because of struggle,
Right.
and but to make sure we're running to whatever it is He's laying on our hearts. So I do think it's important not to run from, but to run to what God has got about. So it's in the midst of restlessness, it can be discontentment, maybe
Mhm.
with the situation or place that we're in life. But God has a plan, and
Yeah.
He wants to use the struggle for His good. So it may just be to direct us in a particular place, or to teach us something in the midst of wherever we are.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. We've got to be careful not to take a restlessness just as a means to run from
Mhm.
something, but it's an opportunity to stop and seek. All right, God,
Yeah.
what is it you're trying to teach me or show me? Or
Mhm.
even with Gideon, like you were saying a while ago, it's not to avoid the seeking of Him. It's really to dive you deeper into seeking Him.
Right.
Is this of you or not? So.
Right. Um for someone who feels that restlessness right now, how would you encourage them to walk in that? Because we can feel so okay, like I get what Terry's saying. I want to do that. What do I do next?
Well, it's easy for me on this side of restlessness to
Yeah.
say, "Oh, here's what you need to do." In the midst of restlessness,
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing. But I
Mhm.
will say this: restlessness causes us to seek God at a level that we might not seek Him at in the more calm times of life.
Yeah.
So, I would say, I would say, God is up to something.
Mhm.
Look for it. Don't miss it.
Yeah.
It can be something really really good,
Mhm.
and you don't want to miss it. So don't discount that restlessness for,
Mhm.
for whatever reason. Um, but use it. See it as a season or a time that God is wanting to teach you something or show you something that you may not have seen before. So.
I love the humility of yours and Tammie's heart in that season of inviting other people in. Of like, we don't know, because I think sometimes we can wait, like we want to wrestle with the Lord alone and then say, like, this is what I was feeling and this is what He taught me. But for y'all to take it as this vulnerable and raw feeling of like, we don't know why, can you pray with us? And you know, obviously the Lord's will prevail, but like He used people
That's right.
with y'all's story, and that's almost always the case.
Yeah, I think probably more of the credit goes to Tammie in that uh, I don't know. Sometimes I'm the last one to figure out I need help,
Mhm.
and inviting people in to walk with me in the life is not something I'm always good at. Sometimes I try to figure it out or fix it myself without, or try to understand it without but it is valuable. It
Mhm.
really, really is valuable. Just to me and met with this morning, we were just sharing our hearts, just struggles, we're all having. And when you hear that, you realize you're not by yourself.
Right.
Uh, the rest of the guys at the table, we're all in the boat together,
Yeah.
and we've all got things we're struggling with and we need help with. And I think Satan uses our isolation to bring
Mhm.
us down, and we need community. We need people that we can walk through life with. So
Yeah.
I've not always been good at it. I'm still not. I still have to intentionally make that
Me too.
that time to talk with people. So.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. So Seeker Springs. What was the vision for Seeker Springs? What led you to that name? You know, what did that look like?
The name came. I told you September the 10th on that Monday morning in that sanctuary.
Yeah.
So we spent that time praying um, about what, what does it look like? And I remember on December the 10th, it was about 8 o'clock at night. God gave me the scripture, Isaiah 55, verses 1 and verse 6. Verse 1 says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. You who have no money, come, buy and eat." And then verse 6 says, "Seek the Lord while he is near. Call on him while he still may be found." So that's where the name Seeker Springs comes from. It's from that living water that only he can provide. Um, all you who thirst, come to the waters. But then seeking him while he may be found. So Seeker Springs is where the name came from.
That's awesome.
I think the vision, or my heart or desire for any ministry like that was um, probably probably all those factors I mentioned before. My parents. I remember the struggles my sister and I had with mom and dad's, separation, divorce, and just the heart for her and for other people in that situation. I think Lorenzo in South Texas, God helping me to realize that he could use me and for us to take the be intentional about going and sharing Jesus with people and doing it in a camp kind of setting. I think I think being a student minister at First Monroe and taking students on mission trips, I remember I would take students, around the country, wherever. And I remember Miss Anita Durbin, I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
She would always come to me, "Terry, you mind if I go with you on that mission trip?" And she'd load up and go with us.
That's awesome.
But those mission trips, I think we would go South Dakota or South Texas or, wherever on mission trip. But we would come back, and I was always be burdened for people in our own backyard and helping the students that we could take to Colorado or South Dakota or anywhere on mission trip, and God would use them on that mission trip, but then coming back home and allowing God to use them right here in Monroe and West Monroe. So I think Seeker Springs for me, initially and continues to be just a place where it's a tool that God uses to help people stop and see the truth of who he is. So I see Seeker Springs not just a camp, but it's a tool that God uses to penetrate our community with the truth of who Jesus is. Right now we see women's retreats, but we do a lot of mission camps. We did a mission camp a couple of weeks ago for foster siblings. We've been doing about 10 years now, brothers and sisters who have been separated and that are in foster care, and bringing them together for camp at Seeker Springs. For kids from Parkview Apartments down on the south side of Monroe. We've been doing that. Lindsay, you were part of those camps way back in the day, and we've been doing those for about 22 years, I think now. So it's a tool not just where people come, but we actually take that tool and go out into the community and reach kids that might not have a shot at camp otherwise. We take our ropes course. Like yesterday, I was in Ruston and Shudrint with our ropes, our low ropes elements. We have a ministry called Team Up that really Tammie gave birth to years ago from her marriage and family counseling background. She saw our ropes course as a means of going into schools, working with students that could benefit from those team building low ropes elements. So
that's awesome. Well, and we were talking about this before we pressed record, but Stephen Kersey, who was on a few weeks ago, shared he was saved at Seeker Springs. And when you sat down and we were going through all the people that said, "Oh, you've got to get Terry," you were like, "I remember that night."
Yes.
And 2 others stood up, and I said, "Yeah." After the episode aired, the sister of one of those other boys emailed and said, "I remember that night. This was the speaker." Like how far reaching and intertwined everyone's stories are, and was at Seeker Springs.
Just that very night, I think of the people that had a part in that and were affected by. That was on a Monday night of what we call Slam Camp, our student leadership and missions camp. Stephen Kersey, Jacob Peckford, Esty Harris. But I remember 2 ladies that came that night it kind of surprised me that 3 guys would stand up on a Monday night,
Right.
first night of camp. But there were 2 ladies out on the front porch that came just to pray
Wow.
for that night. And I just can't, I know that God heard those prayers,
Mm.
and we see it. I mean, it was evidence to me that the prayers of those ladies, Michelle Greer and Mary Spicer, were those 2 ladies out there just walking and praying for those students.
Yeah.
So
You're the second person I've heard today say that very thing. I was listening to a speaker that I like, Jackie Hill Perry, talking about this conference they just had, this big conference. She was talking about the warfare they had before, but how the Lord used that to refine them and consecrate them and each of their giftings that they were going to be serving in the conference. And she talked about the prayer team and how I think there was like 7,000 seats, and they prayed over every single seat multiple times throughout the week. And she said, revival doesn't happen because of good preaching or good singing. Those things are important. Like, we should hone those gifts and give those things to the Lord. But she said revival happens because people prayed.
that is true.
And that was so good and so convicting. That's awesome.
I've been guilty way too many times of seeking God after the fact instead of seeking Him before.
Yeah.
Constantly trying to do better.
Yeah.
Because it's true.
It is. I'm the same way, and we've talked about that on the podcast recently, just like how I can seek Him in my actions and in my obedience and that sort of thing, but like to prayerfully do all of those things first and foremost, and that can be the last thing I think of, which is crazy but true.
Yeah, Jill's helped me with that a lot. Jill prays about everything, and she'll stop me in my tracks a lot of times, and it's convicting for me. Like I should have led us in doing that, but thank God for godly wives that do help us to stop and slow down and seek Him first.
So good. I want to ask you before we get into Tammie's story. About Seeker Springs. Well, 2 things really. One, did you have any idea how the Lord would use Seeker Springs when you gave that yes?
People ask me that from time to time, and I probably knew about 15% of what took place, what has taken place at Seeker Springs. I knew there would be summer camps. I knew there would be retreats. But other than that, I had no clue what all God would do. The doors He opened up, the ministry opportunity, the Parkview apartment ministry, the foster kids camps, the ropes course, and the team up, and the after school camp that we did for a number of years, the basketball league. There were so many things. I had no clue what he was gonna do, but it's just been, we take a step of obedience, and then He opens other doors, and then He opens other doors. So we started out with 20 acres and an old school. Man, it was pretty run down. And that's why the association had sold it. It needed a lot of repair, and they were torn on whether to pour that money into that or put it in other areas. It's funny now that just came to my mind, the vote for the sale of Okaloosa took place in the old chapel at North Monroe.
Really?
I had not thought about that. That's crazy.
So funny. Yeah, small story.
Yeah. In fact, the vote was 50-50. It was even, and they had to re-vote to see which side it fell, and it fell. And I just happened to be there. I was student minister at First Monroe.
Yeah.
With no idea not even thinking about the idea of running a camp or being a part of that.
Yeah.
But I happened to be there that night, and they re-voted, and it fell on the side of selling. But
wow.
I kind of got sidetracked with that thought. That kind of
that's amazing.
In the chapel.
That's crazy. So, having asked that, the fact that God can and will and has done immeasurably more than we could even ask or think or imagine, were there times in ministry, because you're still doing it, you're still going, not just with that avenue, but with the group of guys this morning, whatever that looks like. I know we would need 3 more episodes to talk about all the things, but were there ever times where you just felt burned out or why did you call us to do this? Or is this doing anything?
Yes.
Moments of that.
Yes. Pretty regularly.
Yeah.
God, are you sure this is what you got us about?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a constant, and
Mhm.
um, I think that surrender that we had talked about earlier
Mhm.
is something we're continually. God, am I about what you would have me about today? We've been in ministry now at Cedar Springs. January would be 27 years,
Mhm.
and He has. There has been so many times where we started out with 20 acres in that old school that I talked about. We've got
Mm.
217 acres now. In probably the first 3 years, all of us were just volunteers. It was
Yeah.
just, um, I mean, we knew we were starting from scratch out there. And
Mhm.
um, me and a buddy mowed lawns to begin. That's how I took care of bills in the beginning. Just, I mean, we knew it was going to. And so, yes, there were a lot of times, God, are you sure?
Yeah.
How are we going to do this? And I remember when the possibility for additional property came up, 150 acres right next door to us. I remember um, it was part of the Durbin property, Miss Anita Durbin's property,
Wow.
and uh, I remember she came to us and was wanting to know if we were interested. Her house had caught on fire, and she was going to move, and they were going to sell the property, and when she asked us were we interested, I remember going to the board, and the answer was yes, but we were trying to figure out how to pay the light bill that month,
Right.
much less purchase 150 acres with three houses on it. But so I remember asking God, how?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes, but I don't have any clue how this could take place.
Yeah.
But over the course of about 8 years, we saw how He did it. It almost sold a couple of times, but it never did, and God saw fit for us to acquire that property,
Wow.
and we've acquired additional property since then, and ministries have opened up, and been able to hire additional staff and people, and so God has been faithful. But the
Mm.
answer to your question is, did we ever question? I think we're constantly questioning.
Mm.
God, oh, is this of you? Are we doing what you'd have us to do?
Mhm.
Is there something like after school camp in basketball a few years back? We were praying. We knew how to do it, and it was going well and
Mhm.
going good. But is this something you want us to continue to do? And he led us not to continue to do those. So, but it
Yeah.
opened up doors for us to do other things. So
Yeah.
it's a constant.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, in your case and probably in all of ours, it wasn't a bad thing to constantly ask
Mhm.
that, because you followed the spirit into other avenues,
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Um, I want you to tell us about April 2011, and what happened and about that time for you and Tammie.
I will say, as I talk about Tammie, that morning she was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer,
Mm.
and but Tammie, we served in ministry in college before we married. We served in
Mhm.
ministry. She had as much of a heart for student ministry as I did, and we mission trips and camps, and um, kids roll in our house, and she would bake cookies for them and invite them in, and and just all the things in student ministry that she had a heart for student ministry as well. But she also had a heart for what God was doing at Cedar Springs,
Mm.
till the very end. She was a huge part. Lindsay knew Tammie, and um, uh, she was just a part of the mix. In fact, Tammie was a marriage and family therapist,
Mhm.
um, which God knew I needed a marriage and family therapist.
Don't we all?
Yeah, but she worked with the Wellspring here
Mm.
in Monroe, was a counselor, and worked part time, then full time, and then became the first director of the Family Justice Center
Mm.
in Monroe. And but then there in the latter years, Tammie really felt pulled more and more towards Cedar Springs, and she actually came on staff with us at Cedar Springs, our partnership and development coordinator, and so Tammie had an incredible heart for the work at Cedar Springs, and we walked together in a lot of those questioning times of, God, are you sure? And but on Monday morning, I can't remember if that was a Monday morning or not, but it was April the 7th of 2011. Tammie was going to have a routine hysterectomy, and she was a little anxious about it, but I remember on the way to the hospital that morning, she said, "You know, Terry, it's a win-win. So there's no need for me to worry." But she was anxious about it. Now looking back, you women just have an intuition about things that I think us guys miss out on. But she had was having a routine hysterectomy that would have been maybe one night overstay and then come back home and uh, but it lasted longer than normal. And the doctor came out and he said the reason it took longer was because they found um, cancer and what was thought to be cancer, and it was. And so she was diagnosed, um, began realizing that ovarian cancer, it was stage 3 ovarian cancer. That was in April. She began chemo in May. And our youngest daughter, Caitlin, was graduating from high school, and we had planned a trip to San Francisco and to California. And doctor said, you need to do it. And so we followed through with that trip. She had had one round of chemo before we left, went to San Francisco, and um, Kevin Krim grew up in my youth group, and he was serving at a church in Bridgeport, California. Part of our trip was to go see Kevin and Nicole, and
Yeah.
but we did some traveling around, and but I remember we went back. I remember we were at Mammoth Mountain skiing because that's why we really went. Caitlin wanted to go skiing. That's the only place in the country in May that you can ski. And
Yeah.
so we went there, and I remember on Mammoth Mountain, Tammie started losing her hair, and she said, "You know, I think I'm gonna write a book." And she said, "I'm gonna title it um, I Left My Hair in San Francisco." So, uh, but she it would knock her down, but she'd get right back up. It
Yeah.
would knock her down, she'd get right back up, and she uh she fought it. She fought it hard. She was in remission there for about a year and a half. She battled it 6.5 years,
Wow.
and it was about a 2.5 year prognosis. But she battled 6.5 years, and September the 17th uh, of September the 13th of 2017, she passed away. Yeah.
So sorry.
Incredible lady.
Yeah.
God blessed me with Tammie uh, to walk through ministry with, to walk through life, our children.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. And the things she had to see graduation and
our
things with your
first,
children.
yeah, she got to Eli, our first grandchild. Brittany and Jeremy lived in Tyler, Texas.
Yeah.
So Eli was born and Lily was born. Tammie got to be a Grammy.
Yeah.
She went by Grammy.
Yeah.
And, but
So sweet. What did that what did that look like for your faith in that time and following?
it was it was hard.
Yeah.
It was a struggle seeing someone that you loved and you cared about hurting, and you couldn't do anything about it. It's The suffering part of it was hard. Tammie was she was stubborn in that she wasn't going to let um, sickness interfere. I remember Christmas. That first Christmas after she was diagnosed, Christmas of 2011. She was determined we were not going to mess schedule up, and I remember we would have to stop along the way because she just was sick, and but she would not let me turn around. I said, Tammie, that everybody will understand. Nope. And she was determined.
Mm.
And I don't know, seeing someone that you love and care about suffer, just like Jill with Mark,
Yeah.
she watched Mark suffer with with cancer, and it's hard to watch somebody you love, suffer like that and
Yeah.
not be able to do anything about it. But so it does. It really challenges you.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think. I really think God appreciates our honesty in the midst of that struggle,
Yeah.
because He knows better than we do
Mm-hmm.
what it's like to lose somebody. So anyway.
Mm. That's so true, and so needed for people to hear. Um, I know you talked about what God's provision looked like after following that loss
Yeah.
through grandchildren and um I mean through the companionship and the understanding that Jill also has.
Yeah.
I'm sure the bond that you have over those hard things that you've wrestled. Can you talk about some of that?
Yeah, I think for both Jill and Anna, our kids have been a huge part of our provision.
Mm.
Um, remember, after Tammie passed away, even during her sickness, walking that journey together with uh, with our kids was just huge.
Yeah.
Um, you want to be strong for them, but you also need their strength to help.
Mm.
To help you too. Um,
And sometimes to model that it's okay to be broken
yes,
in that same moment.
sometimes just cry together.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That does make me think about the fact that Tammie um, told, I think she told my sister and her mom, Merle. She told them that Terry won't let me cry, and I've thought about that a lot. A lot.
Mm.
I wanted Tammie not to give up. I wanted her to be strong. But but there are times where you just need to, I guess, like right now,
Yeah.
you just need to be able to cry.
Yeah.
And so so
And
anyway,
Jesus did too.
do what?
And Jesus did too.
Yes, he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, kids were and still are a huge part of our provision.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing our kids raise their kids is is very, very good, and they were there for Tammie, Brittany, and Caitlin, and Justin were right there by their mom through the struggle, and by their dad as well. But kids and then grandkids on top of that is just icing on the cake. Man,
Yeah.
grandkids. Tammie, man, loved her time with uh with her grandbabies.
Yeah.
So with Eli and Lily.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, you were talking about beforehand how um now y'all's kids are, planning family functions and,
Yes.
then inviting y'all together, which is so fun,
Yeah.
and I know such a neat thing for y'all.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Once um Jill and I married, our big concern was our kids. We just,
yeah.
I mean, walking this journey together through the sickness of cancer and then losing, for Kristen and Josh, for them to lose their dad,
Right.
and for Brittany and Caitlin and Justin to lose their mom, uh, it's just hard. And we as their parents um, wanted to be careful in our steps,
Mhm.
that we think about and consider them and walk with them, because everybody grieves differently.
Absolutely.
Everybody doesn't need to grieve like I grieve. Just like Tammie saying, uh, Terry doesn't let me cry. Well, I didn't, because I wanted her. I wanted her to fight. I didn't want, when she ever got down, I wanted to build her back up and prop her up. But
That's what I was thinking is the way you've described Tammie is she was such a strong
Mm-hmm.
warrior of a
Yeah,
person, and probably seeing her cry felt like she's given up
that's right.
to you. And so I can understand,
There were others
that
in her
fight.
life, like my sister
Yeah.
and her mom and others that she was able to cry with.
Yeah.
So I think we've all got different parts in the body,
Yeah.
and but my biggest fear with Tammie was during that whole thing. I never wanted her to feel like she was alone.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure she would tell me we'd have to go to Shreveport for chemo and then to MD Anderson for chemo, and she would tell me, she said, Terry, I can get so and so to go, and I said they're welcome to go with us, but I'm going.
Mhm.
I wanted to make sure we would see people at Willis Knighton or MD Anderson that were going through the same struggle, but nobody was there with them, and
Mm.
man, I feared for that. But for Tammie and I, and now Jill and I, we are blessed with the kids that we've got because
Yeah.
they desire to be with their family, and
Yeah.
it's a good thing.
And I'm sure we're genuinely, even through the even through the grief and the loss and the hardness of it not being their mom or not being my dad, like genuinely excited for y'all to have each other, I'm sure.
Yeah, when Tammie passed away in 17, and I knew I knew times were going to be crazy. It was crazy even leading up to. I remember that summer before she passed away, our summer staff at Cedar Springs, we'd always have them down to the house, and we had Lindsay, you and Colin were there, and part of that time just in our living room, just. But I remember we had a devotion one night, and Kendrick Banks was leading our devotion,
Mm.
and he asked all of our staff and all of us that were there in the room, "Is there a word that you would describe how we could best pray for you?" And I remember when it came around to me, the word for me was steadfast.
Mm.
I knew it was already crazy, and I knew once Tammie passed away, it would get even crazier. And because I didn't know what things would look like, I wouldn't have to figure things out and how to navigate. When you become one with somebody,
Yeah.
and then to lose them, it's like I don't know, maybe like losing an arm or a leg or something, trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to navigate through life again without
I can't
without.
imagine.
And so steadfast was the word that I wanted, that was on my heart. Help me to be steadfast. I needed stability in the midst of the crazy.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was my word, was steadfast.
I don't know if you do word of the year. Have you ever heard
I
it,
have,
people
yeah.
um but a few years ago my word of the year was steadfast, and that was such a healing word for me because I can be like very task oriented, but I can be like, okay, we're going to be strong. We're going to strive. We're going to, we're not going to stop kind of thing. Um, Prior to this season where I feel like the Lord's like, you're going to sit and you're going to wait. But when it got to steadfast, um, I, my view of faithfulness shifted a little bit because steadfast to me, it was almost like I would picture this ship, and you're on the sea, and you can't control the weather, you can't control sea life, you can't
Mm.
control anything that comes your way, and so you might get tossed by the waves and you might get thrown by the wind, but your coordinates are still set on the same thing. And so like that was healing to me, to feel like, yes, we're going to take hits, yes, we're going to get off course on our own for things of our own fault at times, but like our focus, our coordinates are set on the Father, and I still love that word.
Hmm. It is, because we're going to face storms in this life.
Yeah.
Gosh, we need His steadiness in the
Mm.
midst of whatever storm, and He does. Man, He provides peace when you don't know. Jill and I were talking about just the other night. God gave her a peace in the midst of the storm when Mark was sick and then passed away.
Mm.
That it was just hard to describe. You almost feel guilty at times
Yeah.
because of the peace. Why am I feeling this peace in the midst of what I shouldn't be feeling peace?
Right.
But God provides that we can't describe.
Yeah.
That and to try to carry that by ourselves, I knew I didn't need to just lean on Terry because it would not be good if I did. And so I needed people to pray that I would be steadfast.
Yeah. Mm, that's so good. Well, you and Jill, I mean, y'all are serving, y'all are doing ministry as well. What's next for Terry? What's next for Jill?
I tell you, let me just tell you just a second how that story unfolded.
Yeah, I would love that.
Um,
I didn't know if you wanted to tell her story or not, but I would love that.
well, it's our story. So Jill, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I'm here, and it's no, she would love for me to tell it. I wish she was sitting here beside me because she could add things that
Yeah.
I don't. But um, during the midst of praying for steadfastness,
Yeah.
I didn't know what the future would look like as far as I didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
I'm just not that. When Tammie would go away on trips, I'd be at one of the kids' house. I would go somewhere. Just being alone is not the way God's wired me.
Yeah. That sounds like
Um,
Andrew.
yeah. So, but I didn't. I knew up front. I said, God, you have got to steer
Mhm.
this thing because left to myself, it wouldn't be good. So, I really I poured myself into my kids and
Mhm.
to ministry and grandkids. That's where I where I spent my time. I'd go home at night. I didn't like the nights. You know,
Yeah.
that's usually the hardest time is
Yeah.
at nights. And I'd go home and eat terrible. I eat terrible. Jill has really helped me out with that. Just eating better, thinking about what I eat. But
Yeah.
um, I'd grab a bite of a corn dog or a waffle or whatever,
Yeah.
and go to sleep and wake up and take off the next
Yeah.
day and go. But in that time, it was about uh, 4 years in. Um, I had thought about the possibility of remarriage. In fact, I talked with Tammie's mom. Merle and I are very close, and she and I just walking together and through this whole journey with Tammie, and even after Tammie's passed away, it's been huge for me. Uh, I think losing a spouse is one thing; losing a child is a whole nother ballgame.
Mm.
But uh, it was in December of 21.
Mm.
Um, I remember I was at an event at First West, and in the back of the sanctuary, I had one of the grandkids. I really don't remember which grandkid I had. I think it was Micah. I had in my arms. He had gotten fussy or whatever, and I'd gone to the back. Well, I passed this lady that caught my eye, and I knew Jill. I knew of her and Mark's journey. I really knew Mark. I really didn't know Jill that well. I
Mm.
knew of her, but I really didn't know her out at restaurants or something. If we saw Mark and I would usually shake hands and speak, but um, he was a year younger than I. We had played ball. Our paths had crossed with baseball, but I knew Mark had passed away, and it had been a year or so, a couple of years, and but anyway, she just caught my eye. I don't know that it necessarily meant anything other than something had happened, and
Mhm.
I immediately started. God is this of you or is this of me? Because
Yeah.
um,
Maybe a little both.
yeah, I mean she's a beautiful lady, and
Mm.
she's definitely um, caught my eye physically, but anyway, but I also knew that it had been a struggle for her.
Right.
I
Right.
knew the journey that she had been through, um, and I knew of that, but really the thought of her and I had never really crossed my mind.
Mm.
Her dad, her mom and dad, her dad was one of my Sunday school teachers at First Monroe. He ended up serving on our board at Cedar Springs, so I've known her mom and dad for 30 years. But so I didn't say anything to anybody that night. She caught my eye, but just began to pray. And about 8 months roll around, August of 22. Um, my daughter, Caitlin, my youngest daughter, Caitlin, serves on with the ministry of First West called Broaden Horizons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the end of their summer, they have a get together, and they were doing it at Greg and Mary Lee Dunn's house. Um, and Mary Lee, I've known Greg and Mary Lee a long time, and Mary Lee said, "Caitlin, why don't you invite your dad?" Because our summer had ended as well. And so I went over and hung out with them and visited with them, and at the end, had supper with Greg and Mary Lee, and the next day, it was either the next day or second day, Mary Lee called me and she said, "Terry, after you left the other night, Greg and I just got to talking, and there's a friend of ours we think you need to meet, and her
Mm-hmm.
name is Jill,
Mm-hmm.
and Jill Feltz." And so that was the second time she caught my eye,
That's
and
so
so
funny. Yeah.
I just prayed, and now Mary Lee calls me about. So I said, "Mary Lee," I said, "don't say anything to anybody," because I knew this was
Yeah.
a weird time, and I knew
Right.
it could affect my kids, it could affect ministry,
Right.
and I didn't want to mess any of that up.
Mm.
So I wanted to talk to Merle, Tammie's mom,
Mm-hmm.
and I went and talked with her, and she, man, she was so encouraging to me,
Mm.
and I didn't mention Jill. I just talked about the idea of remarriage, but then I wanted to talk to my kids, and I went to each one of them. Caitlin first, and she said, "Dad, I think it's time." She said, I just think it's time, and I have a peace about it." And I went to Justin. Justin told me the same thing, but he did tell me something that I really appreciated. Justin said, "Dad, he said, I really do have a peace, and I think it's time." But he said, "I want you to know this feeling that I have." He said, uh, "To I have this feeling that to be okay with this is to betray mom."
Mm.
And that I just felt like that was a man to man, a heart to heart.
Yeah.
I really appreciated him telling me
Yeah.
that, because I had felt the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, to even think about, um, being with somebody else,
Mm.
um, just didn't seem right.
Yeah.
And so I needed to hear that from him, and
Yeah.
we helped each other with that. But he said, "Dad, it's peace." And then Brittany had already moved to Colorado. Her and Jeremy live in Loveland, Colorado, part of a church plant out there. And
Yeah.
but I wanted to see her face to face. I didn't want to talk on, so I called me a plane and I took off to Colorado,
Wow.
and started talking with Brittany. And Brittany, we joke about it. She she said, "Well, Dad, I've got a list." I said, "Oh, really? You got a list?"
True firstborn style.
Yeah, that's Brittany. She's the one that keeps me in line. And she mentions Jill, and
Wow.
I said, "Wow," and because I had not mentioned Jill, and but she mentions Jill because Jill had cut her hair. Uh, for she had Brittany's known Jill longer than any of us, and but she really mentioned Jill more out of the fact that she knew Jill had walked the same journey
Yeah.
that we had walked, and but for me, it was the third time. It
Mm.
was for me. It was like, all right, God.
Another Gideon's fleece.
Yeah, it was just a confirmation for me that this was of God.
Mm.
Um, it was like, how many times more do I need to tell you?
Yeah.
You know. And I remember I came back home, and just praying about the next steps from there. Well, there was a Matthew West concert at First West,
Mm-hmm.
and I did a little stalking on Facebook, and I realized that Jill was going to be at that Matthew. I really had
Yeah.
not planned to go to it,
Yeah.
but I realized she was going to be there. And about 3 o'clock that afternoon, it was February the 12th. I said, "You know what? I'm going to that concert." And it wasn't about Matthew West, even though Matthew West shared a scripture that night, Isaiah 43:19, that says, um, "I'm doing a new thing. Don't you perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert, and I'm doing a new thing." And um, that night, it took me till intermission. I couldn't find her anywhere, and intermission. A girl that had worked with us at Cedar Springs, Liz Clark. You remember Liz Clark?
Mm.
Liz was, I was talking to Liz, and Jill walks up, and she has known Liz since she was a little girl.
Yeah.
And so she starts talking to Liz as well. And I said, how do y'all know one another? And anyway, found out. And well, as soon as we all got through talking, I followed Jill back toward the sanctuary, and I talked to her and said,
Yeah.
I'd be honored if you would go to supper with me. And
Yeah.
she said yes, and the
Yeah.
rest is history.
Wow.
So that's how we came to be.
I love that.
But she had Mark was a godly man.
Yeah.
Um, Kristen and Josh were blessed with a godly father, and he led a life group at First West, um, and Tammie was a godly woman. God just blessed Jill and I both twice, so we're thankful for where we've been. We never hesitate to talk about Mark and to talk about Tammie, and they're part of our lives. They're part of the story.
Yeah.
But we do thank God for where He's brought us. I'll share a scripture with you.
Yeah.
Interrupt me at any time.
Keep going.
When Tammie and I were dating, there was a scripture, and then as we moved toward even talking about the possibility of marriage, there was a scripture in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10, where Peter's talking to the elders of the church who were going through suffering and persecution. And Peter said to them, after having suffered a little while, and that right there gripped us, just that part.
Yeah.
But after having suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ Jesus, will Himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. And man, we've seen that play out in our lives.
Yeah.
God restore what we had no clue how it was going to look or what it would look like. He began the restoration process, and I think that's still going on.
Right.
Restoring, but then confirming, God, is this of you or is this of me? And showing us, even with our kids planning this event tonight, kind of even without us being in the mix, God is just continuing to confirm as He brings our families together. Restore, confirm, and then strengthen us. As Jill and I seek God together, as we struggle together, as He continues to strengthen us. But then to establish us. He established us on March the 4th of 23.
Yeah.
March will be 2 years we've been married now. So
wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's an amazing story. And I love, y'all, the faithfulness of saying, God, it doesn't feel good for me to be alone, but let this be of you, and had you not asked that question, would it have been outside of God's will? Not necessarily, but you wouldn't have had the assurance. You wouldn't have been able to walk in the assurance of this is God's hand in this. And I think sometimes we can cheat ourselves that assurance when we don't stop to ask and seek Him in everything, which is just all over your story. I mean, in the naming of Cedar Springs and the way that came about with you and Tammie together and seeking Him in her battle and then seeking Him even after, even though I'm sure many times it was very hard to continue to do. And it's just a beautiful story that you and Jill are carrying that today, that same spirit of faithfulness and obedience.
Thank God for what He's done.
Yeah.
He's doing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So what are y'all doing now? What do you?
Cedar Springs, about, I guess it's been 3.5 years ago now. I just began feeling the need to begin the transition into the next generation of leadership at Cedar Springs.
Yeah.
And there's a guy that I've known. I've known him since he was little at First Monroe, and he served on staff. In fact, was he y'all's summer staff team lead at Cedar Springs? He was 2010. Curtis Lipscomb served on staff as our first summer staff team lead. That may have been after. Yeah.
Let me get you a mic, Lens.
he he served with us. He was our first summer staff team lead back in 2010. He had already proposed to Lauren, and as soon as summer was over, they were going back to Baton Rouge, and I went down as part of that wedding, and they got married. But I told him when he left Cedar Springs, he had gotten a job with Sky Ranch out in Texas. I said, "Okay, Curtis, you can go to Sky Ranch, learn all you can learn, come on back." I was really joking with him, but here we are, 14 years later, and um, he is our new executive director at Cedar Springs, and man, he's an incredible leader. He is he has a heart for camp ministry. He has a heart for foster kids. He and Lauren both, and he has just he was the man that God led to be the next director of Cedar Springs. So I moved still in transitioning into my new position as director of ministry development.
Yeah.
And that is pretty much what I'm doing right now, telling the story of what God is doing through Cedar Springs, and connecting mission teams. We have a lot of mission teams that come in and help us with camp, whether it be mission camps or foster kids camps, or really whatever we're doing. We give opportunity for mission teams and people to come in and join us and helping us. And so I work a lot with connecting those mission teams. I'm going to be out in Oklahoma in March, leading a Disciple Now weekend, speaking at a Disciple Now weekend for one of the mission teams that comes and helps us. So
that's awesome.
That's more of what I do now. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing today. It was so powerful, and I know parts of it are hard to share, and I know it's also a joy to share what God's done, but we're just so grateful.
It is, and I thank y'all for the privilege. Lindsay, thank you for making the connection.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the opportunity of man, just telling what God has done. That's, with this little bit of time we've got here on this earth, what a privilege. When somebody asks, would you be willing to? Yes. Yes, indeed. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And thank y'all so much for listening in this week. I know you enjoyed Terry's story and just garnered so much encouragement and steadfastness, as I did. And we will see you next week on The Saltworks.
This is my story. This is your story.